Hey, and welcome back to another Learning Java 2D Game Programming video. So, in our last video, we made our own custom parser to be able to save and load our maps. So, at first I was hoping that the serializable interface would work, but it turned out as we went on that it didn't. So, it is good for fast consuming APIs, such as networking, and I talked about this in the other video. But at least now we have our own parser, which means that we are in much more control. So that's great. So then what do I want to do in this video? Well, I want to get to some auto-tiling. As you can see, this is how we have been doing this so far. We place tiles and then we go around them adding edges as they fit. So this works, but it's cumbersome and it's work that we can automate, right? So how will this auto tiling algorithm work? Well, when we place a tile here, say this is a dirt tile, we're going to be looking at all the neighbors. So starting from here and going like this, since we are looping from X, for every X we go through every Y, right? But all of these neighbors, we want to know their states. So we're asking, are you the same tile as me? Are you the same tile as me? Are you the same tile as me? And depending on the value that we get, we're going to map to an index. And we're actually going to make a mapping table for that. So there's no real magic, it's just work. All right. However, I want to start by making a setting, so a checkbox for this auto tiling function, because we might not always want it, right? So for this tile, it knows that these neighbors are not the same tile, but these neighbors are the same tile. So it will become this corner. And that makes sense, right? So here we have, if we put 4 next to each other, then the auto tiling algorithm is going to make it look like this. It's going to use this. And that's all fine and dandy, but there are other combinations that we could be doing with 4 dirt tiles. So if you were to look at this, now this is also considered 4 dirt tiles. And currently we have no way of knowing if we should be using this one or this one, which means we're going to have it mapped to the most common case during auto tiling. And then if you want to do some cool stuff, you're going to have to turn off auto tiling and then do that manually. So therefore we need the option, and I'm going to put it inside of this tool window right here above the tiles. So let's start with that. I am going to head over to the game settings package, and I'm going to make a new class. I'm going to call it editor settings. And in here, we're going to have a private setting boolean, and I'm going to call it auto tile. Maybe. Yeah, sure. All right, alt insert, let's make a constructor. I'm not going to take anything in, but we are going to be instantiating it to a new setting. And I'm going to say false as a default value. Let's also make a getter for that. Awesome. And then close that off. Go into your game settings where you keep the audio and render settings. Let's also keep a private final editor settings in here and instantiate that in the constructor. All right, this is also going to need a getter, so alt insert, getter. There we go. Got to close that off. So now to put the checkbox where we want it, I'm going to go over to the state, the editor, and the UI. So here we have the UI tile menu, and this is where we will be putting it. So currently, the UI tile menu component itself is a horizontal container, which would mean that our checkbox would come first, and then next to it to the right would follow the tiles, and I don't want it to be like that. I want the checkbox to be above the tiles, which means that this now needs to be a vertical container, and we need to introduce a new horizontal container where we put these tiles. So let's do that. A vertical container instead, and then let's make a UI container. I'm going to call it tile container, and that's going to be a horizontal container. And I mean, now we have the window size, but it doesn't matter because it's not a top level container. All right, so all of these we add to the tile container instead. Then let's add first let's add the checkbox, right? So add UI component and new UI checkbox. Now we're gonna need the setting in here. So I'm just gonna take in the editor settings in the constructor for the UI tile menu. That way, first this wants a label. I'm gonna say AutoTile, and then a setting. So editor settings get AutoTile. Right, and then let's add UI component tile container. All right, so now we're gonna need to send this in from the editor state, and we have the game settings, so we can just get the editor settings from that. So let's just see if our option or setting shows up in the game. And it does, great. So this will probably work already. So now we have a way of saying if we wanted to auto tile or not. So let's get to the actual auto tiling. And I think I'm gonna do this inside of the tile placer class. If we don't like it, we can move it. But let's start in here. So after we have placed a tile, we have the states saved, so we know which tile we placed, we know at what grid X and at what grid Y. So now we just need to check if state get game settings, get editor settings, get auto tile, get value. So it's a little long. I hope you understand it. So if get auto tile is true, then by all means auto tile. What do we want to call this? So auto tile, does it make sense to have that as a verb, or do we want to say like do auto tile, or is that let's just say auto tile because I don't know anything better, and pass in the states. All right, so we have created the auto tile method. So what do we need to do in here? Well, first of all, let's get the game map out. And now we want to loop through the neighbors of where we just placed our tile. So for int x is equal to grid x minus 1. X will go on as long as it is smaller than grid x plus 2, since we said smaller, so that will be grid x plus 1, and then it will stop. And then x plus plus, and then the same for y. There we go. So what do we want to do in here? Well, first of all, we don't want to do anything if this grid position that we're at is outside of the bounds. If it's outside of our actual map, we're going to get an index out of bounds exception. We don't want that. So let's start by checking that. So if game map grid within bounds. So we already have this function, and we have the x and the y. So if we are inside of our bounds, then go ahead with doing what we want to do. And that is, we need to get the current tile, get tiles at x and y. So we need to do that, and I'm gonna just show you something quickly. I don't think I talked about this. So when we place a tile, let's say we place this tile. This was a grass tile before, or let's say that this was a grass tile before I just placed it. So I need to do the auto tiling for all of the neighbors. Like, I don't just do the auto tiling for this one, but I start up here and start looking at its neighbors, seeing as how this one just changed. So do I need to update this now? What will this look like now that this neighbor changed? So we will do that for all of these neighbors. And that's why when we get here, we get the current tile, which might be grass. So first of all, get the current tile. Then we need to get the index that we want to have. And here is what I think I talked about. There's an elegant way of solving this problem using, well, bit shifting, and that way getting an int which will serve as an index. The only problem is to really be able to use that elegantly, your art also needs to be structured in a certain order for the indices to work. And if they're not structured in that order, then you need a mapping table. And since I've never really done any bit shifting, we're gonna be doing a slightly less elegant but more easy to understand way. So we are gonna be building a string instead and mapping on that. So it's basically the same idea but less elegant. But it's gonna work for us, so we're gonna move ahead with that. And here's what that will look like. We're gonna get the index from a mapping table, but first we need to know the state of our neighboring tiles. So here's what this is going to look like. We're going to make a switch statement, and if you've used switch statements before, this is going to look a little new maybe. It was quite new to me, but it looks quite good, and you don't have to write break everywhere. So this is a switch statement with lambdas. So we're doing this, switch, and here we need to get that neighboring state. So I'm going to just say get neighbor tiles. I'm going to pass in the game map and the X and the Y. So then you open a block, and in here you can say default gives 6. And that's because I know that index 6 is the base tile for every tile set. So the default would be that. And now let's just pretend that we know one of these strings, which I don't know yet. And the way we're going to calculate this, I can't play this now, right? Because this is sad. Yes, I'm just going to comment this out. So we are now going to build a string, which we'll map on. And considering we have this, and I just placed this tile, it will look like, the string will look like this, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1. So if we were to go inside of here, then a string might look like, so we write case, and then the case, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1. And then that will be something, right? In this case, it would actually be 0, right? So that's how that is going to look. Also, you need to close that off. But now let's make this get neighbor tiles. So let's find out what our neighbors look like. So first of all, I'm going to instantiate a string builder. New string builder. There we go. And let's also get the current tile. Now, let's make a double for loop again and go through all of the current tiles neighbors. So for right, so let's call these actually grid X instead and grid Y. So get tiles, instead we are using these grid X and grid Y. This will make a little more sense to me because that way we can use the X and the Y variable names for these loops. All right, so int Y is equal to grid Y. And then now that we are looping through the neighbors, what's it gonna look like in here? Well, first of all, we need to check that the current tile is within bounds. Actually, what we're gonna do is if it isn't, so game map, if it's not game map with grid within bounds, X and Y, then I'm gonna say string builder append 1, and then I'm gonna continue. So what does this mean? Well, now that I'm saying 1, I'm actually saying that, okay, if it's out of the bounds, we're going to pretend like what's there is the same tile type that we have. That maybe you would say that it's also dirt. So that way it's going to look like the map continues outside of the actual map. So it's the auto-tiling algorithm isn't going to make an edge there. All right. So now that we know that we are within bounds, now we need to know, are we the same type as the current tile or not? So the way we know that is if game map get tiles at X and Y get tile name equals current tile get tile name. All right, now we are the same. So string builder append 1, and if not, string builder append 0. And that's it. So then we just return string builder to string. This of course returns a string. There we go. All right, so this is it. Now we know our neighboring tiles, and it is gonna be looking like this. So after we found the index, we have the current tile, we have the index, then let's create a new tile, a copy of the current tile. So, and I'm gonna call it indexed tile is equal to current tile, no, sorry, tile.copy of current tile. There we go. And then set that indexed tile set tile index that we calculated, and then make sure that we set that tile at X and Y this indexed tile. So now we've updated our game map at this grid position with a copy of this tile with the new index. So this should work, and we've actually already added our first mapping rule. So if we go in and activate, actually I just remember there's probably one more problem first, right? And you're gonna see what. So if I activate AutoTile and click here, awesome. So that's what I thought would happen. So what is happening now? It's saying that X plus width is outside raster, and what it did was it tried to auto-tile the grass. And our grass does not follow the other's dimensions. So it tried getting a tile that is somewhere way off. And I actually think that the way that I'm gonna solve this is to make something of this size and just fill it with all grass tiles. Because as you can see here, I've started trying to add a little bit of variation. So these have variations, and if we have an entire tile map with just grass, we could add grass variations as well, which we might want in the future. So I'm gonna make a grass image of the same size as the other tile sets. That way we won't get this problem. So luckily I've prepared a little, so I have that here. I just overwrote that. And then let's see if that made it happier. So hopefully if we look at the grass now, it is big. So hopefully we won't get that problem. Although this is still small, right, because we don't load it properly. That's probably not an issue right now. So now, there you have it. This is what I talked about earlier. So we have one rule, and that is to do this edge. And it worked. So yay for us. Now all we need to do is to do all the other rules, but they are many, let me tell you. So just like before, like a 90s cooking show, I have prepared. So straight from the oven, a mapping table. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm not sure if I've gotten all of the different cases that we can handle. We'll see, and we'll update it if we need to. But if we load this up again, and I'm gonna go to the editor and turn on AutoTile. Now it doesn't really matter. See? Now it doesn't really matter which tile you use in the tile set. It's just gonna say that it's a dirt tile, and then it's gonna calculate the index. So maybe in the future, when we have AutoTile on, we can either disable or hide some of these. But we'll do that if we have the time. We have more fun things to spend time on. But here you can see it, and sometimes it's still just the base tile, and there's a reason for that. So like right now, if you look at here, there is no tile in here which can handle only two being next to each other. So therefore, this is what it looks like. If we don't have a case that we can handle, then it's just going to default to this index number 6, this base tile. And so that's why it looks like this. But as soon as as soon as there's a rule that works here, it's going to find a way to put those together, right? So hooray for that. As you can see, I also have this little variation, but of course, if we want to do variations, then we have to turn off AutoTile. So there's a little variation. Now, as you may have seen in here, I actually made something called water as well. So I'm just gonna quickly add that, and these updated tiles will of course be in a link in the description. So if we go to the state editor, UI tile menu. So first of all, if we'd like to, we could use the get tile set and then passing grass, but I feel like it's unnecessary since we only have one tile anyway, so we're not going to do that. However, I'm going to duplicate that. I'm going to say water and then press play. Go to the editor, and now we have water. So yay for that, right? And I just made quickly this little sort of lily pad as a variation. So that's fun. I feel like we're starting to get some tools so that we can actually make something that looks a little nice to play on. So yay for that. I feel like we're still not quite done with the editor. I'd like to add some scenery, like maybe some game objects that could be trees or bushes or really whatever. So we are gonna be working a little bit on that as well before we go back to the actual gameplay. But there you have it. Now you have auto tiling. So thank you for watching, and I will see you soon. Hej då!